My name is Jack Reynolds, and this happened to me in the summer of 1956. I still get chills thinking about those 7 days in the Navajo Nation. Sometimes late at night, I wonder if I should even be telling this story, but people need to know. They need to understand what's out there. I was 38 then, still trying to shake off memories from the Korean War. My wife Marie was 36, always carrying her beloved camera everywhere we went. And then there was our son Bobby, just 8 years old, with those bright, curious eyes that could melt anyone's heart. We were supposed to have a simple summer vacation in our Spartan Manor RV, those silver ones that shine like mirrors in the sun. The plan was simple: drive through Arizona, take some nice photos, and maybe help me forget about the war. Marie thought the desert would be good for my nerves. Bobby was just excited about seeing real cowboys and Indians. If we had only known what was waiting for us in those red canyons. It started with a dust storm. Not just any dust storm, the kind that turns day into night and makes you lose all sense of direction. We were driving on this narrow road when it hit. The signs were in Navajo, and like the fool I was, I ignored them. Thought they were just regular warnings about rough roads ahead. That was our first mistake. Our RV started making these weird sounds right as we crossed what I later learned was a sacred boundary. Then everything went quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. I remember checking my watch, 6:17 p.m. The sun was setting, painting everything blood red. Bobby was in the back, playing with his toy soldiers. Marie was cleaning her camera lens. And there we were, stuck in the middle of nowhere, with something watching us from the shadows. I didn't know it then, but that moment marked the beginning of the most terrifying week of our lives. A week that would change us forever. A week that would teach us that some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed, and some lands should remain untouched. That first night in the RV was when things started feeling wrong. Really wrong. The dust storm had finally settled, but our engine wouldn't start no matter what I tried. Marie suggested we wait until morning, and honestly, I was too tired to argue. Bobby had fallen asleep in his little bed in the back, clutching his favorite teddy bear. I remember checking on him around midnight. He was mumbling something in his sleep, words I couldn't understand. Marie was already in bed, but I couldn't sleep. The war had left me with that habit, always needing to stay alert. I sat by the RV window, watching the moonlight cast strange shadows on the red rocks around us. The desert is never really quiet at night. There's always some creature making noise. But this place, the silence felt heavy, like a thick blanket trying to smother us. Then I saw him, an old Native American man, standing perfectly still about 50 feet from our RV. He wasn't there a minute ago, I'm sure of it. He wore traditional clothes and had long white hair that moved slightly in the breeze. Something about him made my military instincts kick in. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The night air was cold. Desert nights are like that. As I walked toward him, he raised his hand, and I stopped. "You have crossed the line," he said in perfect English. "This is not a place for your family." "We're just lost," I explained, trying to sound calm. "Our RV broke down." He introduced himself as White Feather, a medicine man from the local tribe. What he said next made my blood run cold. The dust storm was a warning. The spirits here don't want you. In these canyons, there are things older than time itself. Things that hunger. Things that can wear your face and speak with your voice. I wanted to laugh it off, tell him he was trying to scare us away. But 20 years of military service teaches you when someone is dead serious. "Get out before sunrise," he said. "After that, I cannot help you." He reached into a small pouch and pulled out what looked like dried herbs and some kind of white powder. He handed them to me. "If you cannot leave, burn these inside your metal home. It will give you 1 night of protection. Only 1. Before I could ask anything else, he turned and walked away. Within seconds, he disappeared into the darkness, like he was never there at all. I went back inside the RV, my hands shaking as I held the small bundle he'd given me. Marie was awake now, sitting up in bed. "Jack, who were you talking to?" I looked out the window one last time. The moon lit up the entire valley, but White Feather was nowhere to be seen. Just endless red rocks and shadows that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. "We need to get out of here," I told her, "first thing in the morning." If only we had managed to do just that. The next morning, I woke up to Bobby's excited voice. "Dad! Dad! Come look at the coyotes!" I jumped up, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Bobby was pressing his face against the RV window. Outside, about 100 feet away, 3 coyotes were just standing there. Not on all fours like normal coyotes, but on their back legs, like people. They were staring right at our RV. "That's not right," I whispered. Marie grabbed her camera, but when she tried to take a picture, it wouldn't work. Brand new film, but the camera just clicked emptily. I remembered White Feather's herbs from last night and pulled them from my pocket. They were completely dried up and black, like they'd been burned, even though I hadn't used them. We tried starting the RV again. The engine turned over once, twice, then died completely. That's when Bobby said something that made my skin crawl. "It's okay, Daddy. My new friend says we're supposed to stay." Marie and I looked at each other. "What new friend, honey?" Marie asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "The boy who looks like me. He was in my dreams last night. He says this is his home." I went outside to check the engine again. The morning sun was hot already, but I felt cold all over. That's when I noticed the marks and the dust on our RV, handprints, hundreds of them, all around the windows and doors. Small ones, like a child's hands. Marie followed me out, holding Bobby's hand tight. "Jack," she whispered, "look at the ground." All around our RV, in a perfect circle, was a line of dead animals, mice, rabbits, small birds. They hadn't been there when we went to sleep. "Daddy," Bobby said, pointing to the distance, "there he is, my friend." But when Marie and I looked, we saw nothing but empty desert and those weird coyotes still watching us. I grabbed Bobby's shoulders gently. "Son, what does your friend look like?" Bobby smiled, and somehow that smile scared me more than anything else. "Like me, Daddy. Exactly like me." That's when we heard it, a child's laugh echoing from the canyon. But Bobby was right next to us, not making a sound. Marie squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. "Jack, what's happening to us?" I wished I had an answer. But all I could think about was White Feather's warning, about things that could wear your face and speak with your voice. And it was only going to get worse. We spent that whole day in the RV, trying to keep Bobby busy with his toys while I attempted to fix the engine. Nothing worked. Our radio only picked up static, and when we tried using our compass to figure out which way to walk to the nearest town, it just kept spinning in circles. Around sunset, things got stranger. Marie was making sandwiches when she screamed. I ran to her and found her staring at her camera photos from yesterday. Every picture showed the same thing, dark shadows standing behind us, getting closer in each shot. In the last photo, one of the shadows looked exactly like Bobby, standing right behind the real Bobby. "I need some air," Marie said, heading outside. I watched her walk about 20 feet from the RV. Then my blood froze. Marie was also in the kitchen, still making sandwiches. "Jack?" Both Marys called out at the same time in the exact same voice. I grabbed Bobby and pulled him close. "Marie, get back in here. Now." But which Marie was my real wife? They both looked exactly the same, both moved the same way, both had the same worried look in their eyes. "Jack, what's wrong?" they said together, matching each other word for word. Bobby tugged at my sleeve. "Daddy, that's not Mommy out there. My friend says the real Mommy is the one inside." I wanted to believe him, but how could I be sure? What if this friend was trying to trick us? Just then, we heard White Feather's voice from outside. "Do not let the outside one in. It wears her face, but it is not her." The Marie outside smiled, but something was wrong with that smile. It was too wide, showing too many teeth. She started walking toward the RV door. I slammed it shut and locked it just as she reached for the handle. Through the window, I watched as her face changed. Just for a second, but I'll never forget what I saw. It wasn't my wife's face anymore. It wasn't even human. The thing that looked like Marie stood outside our RV all night, just staring in through the windows. We huddled together in the back, me, the real Marie, and Bobby. None of us slept. How could we? Every few minutes, we'd hear Marie's voice calling from outside, begging to be let in. But the worst part? Bobby kept waving to something in the darkness that only he could see. "Don't worry," he said cheerfully. "My friend says this is just the beginning. They want to play with us first." Play with us. Those words made me realize we weren't just lost anymore. We were being hunted. When morning came, the fake Marie was gone. But things only got worse. Bobby started speaking in Navajo, perfect Navajo, even though he'd never learned it. When we asked him how he could do this, he just giggled and said his friend taught him. Around noon, I saw something that made my heart stop. Bobby was playing outside the RV. We were watching him closely. When I noticed he was talking to someone, I looked at Marie, who was making lunch inside. "Do you see anyone out there with him?" She came to the window and gasped. There were two Bobbies playing together. Exactly the same, down to the little scar on his chin from when he fell off his bike last summer. When they turned to wave at us, I couldn't tell which one was our son. "Bobby!" Marie screamed. "Come inside right now." Both boys started running toward the RV. I had to make a split-second decision. Which one was my real son? That's when I remembered something. That morning, I'd put a small Band-Aid on Bobby's elbow after he scratched it. Only one of the boys had it. I grabbed that Bobby and pulled him inside, slamming the door shut. The other Bobby stood outside, his smile growing wider and wider until it literally stretched from ear to ear. Then he vanished, just disappeared into thin air. But our problems weren't over. That evening, Bobby started getting sick. He was burning up with fever, talking in his sleep, switching between English and Navajo. He kept saying the same thing over and over. "They're coming to take me to play. They want me to join them forever." Marie was crying, holding him tight. I felt helpless. Our water was running low. The RV still wouldn't start. And now our son was sick with something no normal medicine could fix. Just before sunset, we heard drums. Deep, booming drums that seemed to come from inside the earth itself. Bobby sat up in bed, his eyes wide open but completely white, no pupils at all. "The skinwalkers are calling," he said in a voice that wasn't his own. "They want to make me one of them." That's when White Feather appeared again, pounding on our RV door. "Let me in," he shouted. "The ceremony must begin now, or you'll lose your son forever." We had to make a choice, trust the medicine man, or face whatever was coming for Bobby on our own. We let White Feather in. He moved quickly, pulling strange-looking items from his bag, colored sand, herbs, and small bones that I tried not to look at too closely. "The skinwalkers have chosen your son," he said, drawing a circle around Bobby's bed with the colored sand. "They want his pure soul. Have until midnight to break their hold on him." Bobby was getting worse. His skin was burning hot, and he kept talking in two voices at once, his normal voice and another that sounded ancient and wrong. Marie held his hand, crying quietly. "Look!" she suddenly screamed, pointing at the RV's windows. Outside, in the darkness, we could see them, dozens of children, all looking exactly like Bobby. They were pressing their hands against our windows, leaving those same handprints from before. White Feather started chanting, shaking a rattle made of shells. The fake Bobbies outside began to cry, not like children, but like wounded animals. The sound made my teeth hurt. Then something hit our RV, hard enough to rock it. Through the windows, we saw them, the coyotes from before, walking on two legs. But now they were changing shape, turning into people we knew. Marie, me, Bobby, even White Feather himself. "Don't look at them," White Feather warned. "They'll try to confuse you, make you doubt what's real." Bobby suddenly sat up, his eyes still pure white. "My friends want me to come play," he said in that horrible double voice. "They say if I join them, I'll never have to grow old. I can play forever. That's not playing, son, I said, holding back tears. That's not what they really want. Whitefeather's chanting got louder. The fake children outside started screaming. Our RV felt like it was being torn apart. Marie grabbed Bobby tight as everything around us began to shake. Then Bobby spoke again, but this time in a voice that sounded 1,000 years old. If we can't have the boy, we'll take you all. The RV door burst open. Standing there was something that looked like a person, but wrong, all twisted and dark. Behind it were more shapes, moving in ways that people shouldn't be able to move. Whitefeather threw something in the air. It looked like glittering dust. Now, he shouted, you must all hold each other. Don't let go, no matter what you see or hear. We grabbed each other tight, me, Marie, and Bobby, as the things from outside started coming in. Everything happened so fast after that. The air in the RV turned ice cold. I could see our breaths coming out like smoke. Whitefeather was throwing more of that glittering dust, drawing symbols in the air that seemed to glow for a second before fading. The thing in the doorway, I still can't describe it right. It kept changing, like smoke trying to look human. One second it was Bobby, then Marie, then me, then something else. Something old, something angry. The boy belongs to us now, it said in a voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. This land is ours. You are trespassers. Bobby started shaking in our arms. His eyes rolled back, and he spoke in that ancient voice again. Let me go. Let me join them. I want to play in the sacred lands forever. Marie held him tighter. That's not you talking, baby. Fight it. Come back to us. Whitefeather's chanting got louder and faster. The symbols he was drawing started glowing brighter, making the shadows in the RV dance. Outside, those twisted shapes were pressing against all our windows, their not quite human faces watching us. Then something strange happened. The teddy bear Bobby always slept with started moving on its own. It stood up, turned its head to look at us, and spoke in Bobby's voice. Mommy, Daddy, help me. I'm scared. I don't know which way is home. Don't listen, Whitefeather shouted. It's another trick. The thing in the doorway stepped closer. The air got so cold my fingers started to hurt. It reached for Bobby with hands that kept changing shape, human fingers 1 second, claws the next. Last chance, it growled. Give us the boy or we take you all. I looked at Marie. She nodded. We both knew what we had to do. You want someone? I said, standing up. Take me instead. The thing stopped. Even Whitefeather stopped chanting. Daddy, no! Bobby screamed, and this time it was really him. Our Bobby, not the other voice. The thing tilted its head, like it was thinking about my offer. Then it laughed, a sound like wind howling through dead trees. A soldier's soul tainted by war, not as pure as the child's, but... Jack, don't, Marie cried, but I had already stepped forward. That's when Whitefeather threw the last of his glittering dust in the air and shouted something in Navajo. The dust froze in mid-air, forming a pattern of light between me and the creature. Bobby suddenly jerked up, his eyes clear again. Daddy, he screamed, reaching for me. The moment he did, a bright light shot from his hand, connecting with Whitefeather's floating dust pattern. The thing screamed, not like a person, not even like an animal. It was like hearing a mountain crack open. All the fake copies outside our RV started melting away like shadows in sunlight. Now, Whitefeather yelled. The boy's love for his father, it's breaking their power. Quick, all of you, hold hands. We grabbed each other's hands, forming a circle. The thing tried to reach for us one last time, but it couldn't get past the light coming from Bobby. You dare? It hissed. This land has been ours since before time. No, Whitefeather said calmly. This land belongs to no one, and love is older than even you. The light got so bright we had to close our eyes. The thing let out one final, terrible scream. When we opened our eyes again, it was dawn. The RV was a mess, covered in that colored sand and those handprints. But we were alive. Bobby was himself again, tired but okay. Outside, the desert looked normal. No more walking coyotes. No more copies of us. Whitefeather was sitting quietly in the corner, looking older than ever. "It's over," he said softly. "They're gone, for now. But this place will remember you, and you will remember it." He was right. Our RV started working right after that, and we drove away as fast as we could. But none of us were the same after that night. Bobby never had another nightmare, but sometimes he still speaks Navajo in his sleep. Marie's camera never worked right again. And me? I learned something about love and sacrifice that no war could ever teach me. We never went back to that valley, but sometimes on quiet nights, I think I can hear those drums calling from somewhere far away. And I hold my family a little closer, grateful for every normal, ordinary day we have together. It's been almost 69 years since that night, but some things you never forget. Bobby is a grown man now, with kids of his own. He's a teacher at a school near the Navajo reservation, though we never told him why he can still speak their language so well. Marie passed away peacefully 5 years ago, but until her last day, she never took another photograph. Every camera she touched would show those strange shadows in the pictures, always standing behind our family, watching. As for me, I'm an old man now, but that place left its mark on me. Sometimes, when I look in mirrors, I see things, shapes moving in the background, faces that aren't quite right. And I know they're still out there, those ancient things, waiting in that valley. Last month, Bobby's youngest son, my grandson Tommy, came to me with something that made my heart stop. He showed me his phone, a picture he'd taken near their house. In it, there were those same handprints we saw on our RV, small ones, all over his bedroom window. "Grandpa," he said, "last night I had a dream. A boy who looked just like me wanted to play. He said you'd understand." I called Whitefeather's grandson right away. Yes, we stayed in touch all these years. He's a medicine man now, just like his grandfather was. He told me something I already knew deep down. The skinwalkers hadn't forgotten us. They were just waiting, being patient. They're good at that. They have all the time in the world. So now I'm writing this story as a warning. If you're ever driving through the Navajo Nation and you see signs in a language you don't understand, turn around. If a dust storm comes out of nowhere, don't drive through it. And if your child tells you they made a new friend who looks just like them, run. Run as fast as you can. Because some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed. Some lands should be left alone. And some games, once started, never really end. Whitefeather told me one last thing before we left that valley. The skinwalkers are patient. They might wait a year, or 10 years, or 50 years. But they always collect what they think belongs to them. I'm 107 years old now, and I know my time is coming soon. But I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of what might be waiting for me on the other side. Because sometimes, late at night, I still hear those drums. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear children laughing in the darkness. And I wonder, did we really win that night? Or did they just start a longer game? My name is Bill Harrison, and what I'm about to tell you happened to me in September 1983. I still get chills thinking about those 2 weeks in Olympic National Forest. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if anyone will believe my story, but I need to share it. People need to know what's really out there. I was 35 then, working as a wildlife photographer after leaving the Marines. My wife Lucy was 33. A brilliant zoologist who could tell you everything about any animal you'd point at. We were that perfect nerdy couple, me with my cameras, her with her research papers. We had no idea our lives would change forever in those woods. It all started when Lucy got this government research grant to investigate Bigfoot sightings in Washington state. Yeah, I know how that sounds. Bigfoot? Really? Trust me, I was skeptical too. I used to laugh at those blurry photos and crazy stories. But not anymore. Not after what we saw. We packed up our 1981 Airstream trailer, our home away from home, with enough supplies for 2 weeks. Cameras, food, research equipment, everything we'd need. The plan was simple. Document any evidence we could find, take some photos, write some papers. Normal scientific stuff. Man, we were so naive. The drive to Olympic National Forest was beautiful. But something felt off right from the start. It was unusually cold for September, and this heavy fog hung in the air like a thick blanket. The trees were ancient, some over 500 years old, and so tall they seemed to touch the clouds. We found this spot near an old logging road to park our Airstream, far from any hiking trails or campsites. That first evening, as I was setting up my camera equipment, Lucy came running from the forest edge. She'd found something strange, perfectly good camping gear, just abandoned. A tent, sleeping bags, everything left behind, like someone had just vanished. "Bill," she said, her voice shaking, "something's not right here. This is the 3rd report of missing hikers in this area this month." I hugged her and said what any stupid, overconfident ex-Marine would say, "Don't worry, honey, we're safe. What could possibly go wrong?" I wish I could go back to that moment and slap myself, because that night, as the sun set and darkness crept in, we heard the first wood knocks, and that was just the beginning of our nightmare. That first night in the forest was when things started getting weird. Lucy and I were sitting in our Airstream, going through our equipment while rain pattered on the roof. Around 9 p.m., we heard it. Knock, knock, knock. 3 loud hits, like someone banging a baseball bat against a tree. "Did you hear that?" Lucy whispered, grabbing my arm. I nodded, reaching for my flashlight. "Probably just a woodpecker," I said, but we both knew woodpeckers don't come out at night. The knocking came again, this time from a different direction. Then another from somewhere else. It was like we were surrounded. I switched on our outside lights, but the fog was so thick we could barely see past our trailer's windows. The next morning, while checking our trail cameras, we found the first footprints. They were huge, about 16 inches long, and so deep in the mud that whatever made them must have been incredibly heavy. Lucy made plaster casts of them, her hands shaking with excitement and fear. "Bill, these aren't bear prints," she said, measuring them, "and look at the toe patterns. They're almost human-like." That afternoon, we met Marcus Cooper, a local hunter who came stumbling out of the woods. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were torn, and he was missing his hunting gear. "You folks need to get out of here," he said, accepting the hot coffee Lucy offered. 3 days ago, my hunting group, 4 experienced men, they just disappeared. One minute they were there, the next. He shook his head, his hands trembling around the coffee cup. "What happened?" I asked, getting my recorder ready. Marcus looked around nervously before speaking. "They're not what people think they are. They're smarter. They work together. And he lowered his voice. They can do things that ain't natural." I was about to ask what he meant when we heard it, a deep, rumbling sound that made our coffee cups vibrate. It wasn't quite a growl, more like a warning. Marcus went pale. "They're watching us right now," he whispered. "They've been watching since you arrived, and they don't like visitors in their territory." Lucy grabbed my thermal camera and pointed it toward the trees. Through the screen we saw them, 3 pairs of glowing eyes about 8 feet off the ground, staring right at us. That's when we realized we weren't the observers anymore. We were being observed. Marcus insisted on staying with us that night. None of us wanted to be alone after what we'd seen. We locked ourselves in the Airstream, but sleep was impossible. Every little sound made us jump. Around midnight, the real terror began. "Look at this," Lucy whispered, pointing at her research equipment. The needles on her instruments were going crazy, measuring sounds too low for human ears to hear. They're communicating. Thud. Something heavy hit the side of our trailer, making it rock. Then we heard scratching, like huge claws dragging across metal. "They've never been this aggressive before," Marcus said. his face pale in the dim light. Something's different. I grabbed my camera, hands shaking as I tried to take photos through the window. The fog outside was thick, but in my camera's flash, I caught glimpses of massive dark shapes moving around our trailer. Then the power went out. In the pitch darkness, Lucy's voice trembled. "Bill, the generator cable." Something had ripped it apart. We sat in the dark, listening to heavy footsteps circling our trailer. The creatures were testing us, looking for weak spots. I could hear their heavy breathing and occasional grunts. "There's something you need to know," Marcus whispered. 2 years ago, I found a hidden government facility deep in these woods. They were doing experiments, trying to study these creatures. But something went wrong. The creatures, they evolved, they learned, and now they want their territory back. A massive hand slammed against our window, making us all jump. Through the glass, for just a second, I saw it. A face that was almost human, but not quite. Its eyes held intelligence and something else. Anger. "They're not just animals," Lucy said, looking at her readings. "They're organizing, planning." The night felt endless. We huddled together, jumping at every sound, watching shadows move outside. But the worst part? We knew this was just the beginning. When dawn finally came, we found strange symbols carved into the trees around our trailer. They looked ancient, but they had been made last night. The creatures were sending us a message. We were not welcome here. The next morning we tried to leave, but our truck wouldn't start. Something had been ripped out from under the hood. We were trapped. "They're smarter than we thought," Marcus said, checking our supplies. "They want us to stay." That's when Lucy noticed something strange on her laptop. All our research files were gone. Not deleted, just gone. Even our backup drives were empty. "That's impossible," she said, clicking through empty folders. "Unless..." A loud crash from outside cut her off. We rushed to the window. About 50 yards away, one of my expensive cameras lay smashed on the ground. Right next to it was our backup hard drive, crushed to pieces. "They don't want any evidence," I whispered. "They're destroying everything we collected." The day got worse. Our radio picked up nothing but static. Our phones had no signal. Even our satellite phone was dead. We were completely cut off. Around sunset, Marcus saw something that made his face go white. "The trees?" He pointed with a shaking hand. "Look at the trees." In the fading light, we saw them. Dozens of pairs of eyes, glowing in the darkness between the trees. They were standing perfectly still, just watching us. "Bill?" Lucy grabbed my arm. "They're not just watching, they're waiting." That's when Marcus told us the full truth. The government facility I found. They weren't just studying these creatures, they were trying to control them. But it backfired. The creatures learned from us. They learned about our technology, our weapons, our weaknesses. Suddenly, a deep, rumbling sound filled the air. It wasn't like anything I'd heard before. Not quite a roar, not quite a howl. But it made my whole body feel cold. "That's the Alpha calling them," Marcus whispered, "and it's calling for something big." We watched in horror as the eyes in the forest began to move. They weren't random anymore. They were moving in formation, like soldiers. Lucy's voice shook as she said what we were all thinking. "They're not just defending their territory anymore, they're taking it back." That night changed everything. Around 2 a.m., we heard something massive moving through the forest. The footsteps made our trailer shake. "Don't move. Don't make a sound," Marcus whispered. Through the window, we saw it. The Alpha. It was huge, at least 12 feet tall. Unlike the others, this one stood straight up, almost like a human. But there was nothing human about its eyes. They glowed with an eerie blue light. Then something impossible happened. A voice entered my head, but no one was speaking. "Leave. Last chance." Lucy and Marcus heard it too. We could tell by their faces. The Alpha was talking to us in our minds. Suddenly, Marcus jumped up. "The back door! They're breaking in!" He was right. The metal door was bending inward, like something incredibly strong was pulling it. Marcus grabbed his hunting knife and ran to hold it shut. "Run!" he shouted. "I'll hold them off. There's a cave system half a mile east. You might make it." Before we could stop him, Marcus shoved us toward the emergency hatch on the trailer's roof. The last thing I saw was him bracing against the door as it burst open. Lucy and I ran through the dark forest. The creatures were everywhere, moving like shadows between the trees. But they weren't chasing us. They were hurting us. "Bill, look!" Lucy pointed ahead. There it was, a cave entrance. We ducked inside just as something huge swooped over our heads. Inside the cave, our flashlights revealed something incredible. The walls were covered in ancient paintings. They showed the creatures, but not as monsters. They were drawing, building, teaching. They had their own civilization, long before humans. "Bill?" Lucy's voice cracked. "We didn't discover them. They've been watching us evolve." A deep growl echoed through the cave. We turned around slowly. The Alpha stood there, blocking our only way out. The Alpha didn't attack. Instead, it just stared at us. Then, more thoughts filled our heads. We were here first. Humans took our lands, hunted us, tried to study us. Now we take back what's ours. Lucy stepped forward, her scientist's curiosity somehow stronger than her fear. You can teach us. We can learn from each other." That's when everything went wrong. A loud explosion shook the cave. Military helicopters appeared overhead. Someone had finally noticed we were missing. The Alpha roared, and suddenly the cave was chaos. Rocks fell everywhere. Lucy got hit and collapsed. As I ran to help her, I saw something strange. Her eyes were changing, glowing faintly like theirs. "The experiments," she gasped. "The government facility. They must have put something in our water. I'm changing, Bill." I had to choose stay with my changing wife or run. But before I could decide, a younger, smaller creature appeared. It looked at Lucy with what seemed like sympathy. To my surprise, it helped us. It showed us a hidden tunnel while the Alpha was distracted by the helicopters. As we escaped, Lucy's transformation stopped halfway. Her eyes still glowed, but she was still mostly human. We made it back to civilization, but nothing was the same. The government took all our evidence, erased our research, and marked that part of the forest as forbidden. They told everyone it was for environmental protection. Lucy still has episodes where she can sense them. She says they're spreading, taking back more territory every year. Sometimes, on cold nights, we hear wood knocking in the distance. The truth is out there in those woods. Marcus was right. They're not what people think they are. They're smarter, stronger, and they're patient. They've been watching us, learning from us, waiting for the right time. And someday, they'll do more than just take back one forest. I know this sounds crazy, but next time you're in the woods and feel like something's watching you, something probably is. Because now, I know the truth. We were never alone. We were never the only ones. And we were never at the top of the food chain. We were just allowed to think we were. My name is Frank Thompson, and what I'm about to tell you happened to me back in 1977. I still get chills thinking about those 8 days in the boundary waters of Minnesota. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if anyone will believe my story, but my son Danny and I know the truth of what we encountered in those frozen woods. I was a forest ranger then, 42 years old, and barely holding it together after losing my wife Sarah to cancer that spring. Danny was just 12. A quiet kid who stopped smiling the day his mom died. Can't blame him, I wasn't doing much better myself. Work became my escape, but that backfired when I started snapping at my coworkers. After yelling at my supervisor for the 3rd time that month, they forced me to take leave. "Get your head straight, Frank," they said. "Take some time off. Be with your boy." That's when I got this crazy idea about taking Danny camping in our old Winnebago Brave. The 1975 model Sarah and I bought when times were better. Danny used to love our family camping trips, back when he was younger and his mom was still with us. I thought maybe, just maybe, it could help us both heal. Looking back, I should have listened to the signs, should have paid attention when that old Native American man, Joseph Running Bear, grabbed my arm at the last gas station before the wilderness. His eyes were wild with fear when he warned us about the hunger spirit that roamed these lands. But grief can make you blind to warnings and stupid with determination. Just a few days in nature, I told myself. Just me and Danny like old times. I didn't know then that the ancient evil lurking in those woods had already marked us. Didn't realize that our simple camping trip would turn into a fight for my son's soul against something that shouldn't exist outside of nightmares. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, from that cold October morning when we packed up the RV and headed north, not knowing we were driving straight into a horror that would change us forever. The drive north started normally enough. Danny sat quietly in the passenger seat, playing with his Rubik's Cube, the last birthday gift his mom gave him. The heater in our old Winnebago hummed steadily as we left Minneapolis behind. Things started getting weird about 3 hours in. The radio, which had been playing normal music, suddenly filled with static. Through the noise, I swear I heard children laughing. Not the happy kind of laugh, but something that made my skin crawl. Danny heard it too. I saw him grip his cube tighter. "Dad," he whispered, "can we turn it off?" I did, but the silence that followed felt even worse. The temperature dropped fast, way too fast for a normal October day. The trees along the road were covered in frost, even though it was only afternoon. That's when we started seeing the deer. The first one was lying by the roadside, twisted in a way that didn't look natural. Then another, and another. Each one looked like it had been arranged. Like someone, or something, had placed them there on purpose. "Dad, what's wrong with them?" Danny asked, his voice shaking. "Probably just accidents," I said, but I didn't believe it myself. By sunset, we reached the last gas station before the wilderness area. That's where we met Joseph Running Bear. He was an old man with deep wrinkles and eyes that had seen too much. While I was filling up the RV, he came out of nowhere and grabbed my arm. "You can't take the boy up there," he said, his voice urgent. "Not now. The hunger spirit walks these woods." I tried to laugh it off, but my laugh stuck in my throat when I saw how serious he was. "The Wendigo," he whispered, glancing nervously at the darkening sky. "It seeks those who carry grief, and you too." He looked at Danny through the RV window. "You both carry so much." He tried to give me a small leather pouch, an amulet he called it. I refused, politely. Growing up in Minnesota, I'd heard all the old native legends, but I was a practical man. I dealt in real things, trees, wildlife, weather patterns, not spirits and monsters. If only I'd listened. As we drove away, I caught a last glimpse of Joseph in the rearview mirror. He stood there, watching us leave, that leather pouch still in his hand. And for the first time since Sarah died, I felt real fear creeping into my heart. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in strange colors. Danny had fallen asleep, his Rubik's Cube fallen between the seats. Ahead of us, the road disappeared into the darkening forest, and somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard a sound, not quite human, not quite animal. We were heading into the boundary waters, and something was waiting for us there. We found what seemed like the perfect camping spot just before dark, a small clearing near a frozen lake. The trees around us were tall pines, their branches heavy with early snow. I parked our Winnebago facing the lake, thinking Danny would like the view when he woke up. That first night was when things started feeling wrong. Around midnight, I woke up to Danny shaking my shoulder. "Dad," he whispered, "something's walking around outside." I listened. The sound was clear, crunching footsteps in the snow, circling our RV. But when I shined my flashlight through the windows, there was nothing there. Just fresh footprints in the snow, footprints that looked almost human, but too big and somehow wrong. The next morning, Danny found something that made my blood run cold. He was playing near the tree line when he called out to me. "Dad, look at this!" On several trees, there were symbols carved into the bark. They looked old, but somehow the cuts seemed fresh, like they were just made. I recognized some of them from my ranger training. They were Native American symbols, but I'd never seen them arranged like this. Then came the hunger. We had packed enough food for 2 weeks. Canned soups, dried meat, cereals, everything we needed. But that morning, all our food was frozen solid. Even the cans were ice cold inside, despite the RV's heater running all night. We tried to heat some soup on our camping stove, but the hunger we felt wasn't normal. It was like nothing could satisfy it. Danny ate 3 bowls of soup, but said he still felt starving. I felt it too, a deep, gnawing emptiness that food couldn't fix. That afternoon, the temperature dropped even more. The thermometer showed 15 degrees below zero, impossible for October. Our breath came out in thick white clouds inside the RV, even with the heater on full blast. As the sun set on our second day, I heard Danny talking in his sleep, but the voice that came from his room wasn't his. It sounded exactly like Sarah, his mother. He was speaking in her voice, saying things only she would know. I sat there in the dark, listening to my dead wife's voice coming from my son's mouth, and I knew we needed to leave. But when I tried to start the RV, the engine wouldn't turn over. We were stuck. Through the windshield, I could see the northern lights dancing in the sky, beautiful green and purple waves. But there was something else moving out there on the frozen lake. A tall, thin shadow, walking on the ice. It stopped and turned toward our RV. Even from this distance, I could feel it watching us. By day 3, things got worse. Much worse. Danny wasn't himself anymore. He barely slept, and when he did, he would wake up screaming about being hungry. Not normal hungry, he said it felt like his insides were trying to eat themselves. I noticed his fingers looked longer, thinner, and his skin had a grayish tint that wasn't there before. That morning, I found all our food gone. Every single can, every package, just vanished. The cabinet doors were still locked, and there were no signs of animals getting in. It just disappeared. "Dad," Danny said, staring out the window, "someone's calling me." I heard it too, a whisper carried on the wind, sounding like a mix of Sarah's voice and something else, something ancient and wrong. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Around noon, Danny went missing. 1 minute he was sitting in the RV, the next, gone. I searched frantically, calling his name until my voice gave out. The forest seemed to swallow my shouts, and the snow kept falling, covering any tracks. 6 hours. 6 terrifying hours of searching. When Danny finally came back, he walked out of the forest as if nothing had happened. But he was different. His eyes had a whitish film over them, and he was speaking in a language I'd never heard before, something that sounded ancient and made my teeth hurt just hearing it. That's when I found the journal. It was tucked away in one of the RV's storage compartments, a worn leather book I'd never seen before. Inside was Joseph Running Bear's handwriting describing everything we were experiencing. The Wendigo curse, the transformation, the hunger that never ends. According to the journal, we had until midnight of the 8th day before Danny's change would become permanent. The last page had detailed instructions for a ritual that could save him, but the ingredients needed, they seemed impossible to find in these woods. And the warnings about what would happen if the ritual went wrong made my hands shake. Through the RV's window, I could see Danny standing in the snow, his body unnaturally still, staring at the forest. When he turned to look at me, his eyes were completely white. And somewhere in the darkness, something answered his stare with a howl that made the windows rattle. The journal said I needed 4 things for the ritual: cedar branches from an ancient tree, water from the frozen lake, a personal item of Danny's that his mother had touched, and my own blood. I had until midnight, Just 6 hours to save my son. Finding the cedar tree was harder than I thought. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness as I stumbled through the snow. The journal said I'd know the right tree by the symbols carved into it. After an hour of searching, I found it. The biggest cedar I'd ever seen, with those same strange markings we'd spotted earlier. Back at the RV, Danny was getting worse. His fingers had grown even longer, and his skin was almost transparent now. He wouldn't speak anymore. He just made these awful clicking sounds with his teeth. "Hold on, buddy," I whispered. "Dad's going to fix this." Breaking through the lake ice nearly gave me frostbite, but I got the water. For the personal item, I took Danny's Rubik's Cube, the last gift from Sarah. When I touched it, I swear I felt Sarah's presence, like she was trying to help us. Following the journal's instructions, I drew a circle in the snow using cedar branches. Inside, I drew symbols copied from the book, using my own blood. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly messed it up. That's when I heard it, a sound that made every hair on my body stand up. Heavy footsteps in the snow, coming closer. Something big was approaching from the forest. I looked up and saw it, the Wendigo. It was at least 15 feet tall, with skin like old bark and antlers that scraped the low-hanging branches. Its eyes, God, its eyes were like looking into an endless hunger. Danny started walking toward it, like he was in a trance. I had to act fast. "Take me instead," I shouted, stepping into the circle. "Leave my boy alone." The Wendigo stopped, its head tilted, like it was considering my offer. The wind picked up, swirling snow around us, and the temperature dropped so low it hurt to breathe. I pulled out Joseph's amulet, the one he tried to give me at the gas station. It had appeared in the RV somehow, right next to the journal. As I held it up, it began to glow with a blue light. The amulet's blue light seemed to hurt the Wendigo. It let out a screech that shook icicles from the trees. But before I could do anything else, it charged at me. I started reciting the words from Joseph's journal, strange words I didn't understand, but somehow knew how to say. With each word, the amulet glowed brighter. The Wendigo was only feet away when Danny suddenly screamed. Not in the monster's voice he'd been using, but in his own voice, my boy's voice. "Dad, look out!" Everything happened so fast after that. The Wendigo's claws caught my shoulder, and I felt hot blood soaking through my jacket. But I kept saying the words, even as I fell into the snow. The circle I'd drawn began to glow, trapping both the Wendigo and Danny inside its light. Then I heard another voice, Sarah's voice, but real this time, not like the Wendigo's trick. A warm wind blew through the freezing night. The amulet in my hand turned hot, almost too hot to hold. "You can't have them," Sarah's voice said. "Not my boys." The Wendigo howled, not in anger this time, but in pain. Its body started to crack like ice in spring, blue light pouring from the cracks. Danny collapsed in the snow, and I crawled to him, holding him close despite my injured shoulder. The Wendigo tried to reach for us one last time, but the ground beneath it opened up. Blue fire shot from the symbols I'd drawn, wrapping around the creature like chains. With one final, earth-shaking scream, it was pulled down into the darkness. Then everything went quiet, the kind of quiet you get after a big storm. Danny stirred in my arms. When he opened his eyes, they were his own again, normal, human eyes filled with tears. "Dad," he whispered. I was so scared. "Me too, buddy. Me too." As we hugged each other in the snow, I saw someone standing at the edge of the clearing, Joseph running bare. He smiled, then slowly faded away like morning mist. That's when I remembered what people at the gas station had told us. Joseph had died 20 years ago, trying to save his own family from the Wendigo. The sun was rising now. Our breath no longer made clouds in the air. The unnatural cold was gone. Danny's skin was back to normal, and his fingers were their regular size again. We were safe, but we knew we'd never be the same. It's been many years since that night in the Boundary Waters, but some things you never forget. Our old Winnebago still has those strange ice marks on its sides. They never melted away, even in the hottest summer. Sometimes they glow faintly at night, like they're remembering. Danny and I talk about it now and then. He's grown up now, with kids of his own, but he still keeps that Rubik's Cube. We both know it wasn't just his mother's last gift. It helped save his life that night. The strangest thing is how the hunger changed after that. Not the normal kind of hunger, but the empty feeling we both had after losing Sarah. It's like that night helped us finally start healing. Maybe that's what the Wendigo was really after, not our bodies, but our grief. We went back to that spot once, years later. The circle I'd drawn was gone, but the cedar tree with the symbols was still there. We left tobacco and sweet grass as a thank you, just like Joseph's journal said we should. It felt right. Sometimes, on cold nights when the northern lights are dancing, I think I hear Sarah's voice in the wind. Not the scary version from that night, but her real voice, warm and loving. Danny says he hears it too. We think maybe she's still watching over us, keeping the dark things away. The rangers never did figure out why all those deer were arranged on the road that day. And every few years I hear stories about strange happenings in those woods, people feeling unnatural hunger, seeing tall shadows in the trees. When I do, I send them Joseph's amulet. It always finds its way back to me somehow, usually just before someone else needs it. Danny's oldest kid is 12 now, the same age he was during our encounter. Last week, she asked if we could all go camping up north. Danny looked at me, and we both smiled. We'll go, but we'll be prepared this time. Some stories need to be passed down, and some warnings need to be heard. Because the Wendigo is still out there, waiting in the cold, dark places. But now we know something it doesn't. Love is stronger than hunger, and family bonds can overcome even the darkest of curses. If you're ever up in the Boundary Waters, and you feel an unnatural chill or hear strange whispers in the wind, remember my story. And if you see an old Native American man at a gas station offering you an amulet, take it. My name is Thomas Walker, and what I'm about to tell you happened to me and my family back in August 1968. I was a 52-year-old retired schoolteacher then, living with my wife Emily and our teenage son Jimmy. Looking back now, I still get chills thinking about those 7 nights in the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas. It all started when Emily suggested we take a family trip in our old Dodge RV. Jimmy had been having trouble at school, fighting with other kids, skipping classes, and staying out late. We thought maybe some family time might help sort things out. If only we had known what was waiting for us in those mountains. I remember that evening so clearly, the sticky August heat, the harvest moon hanging low in the sky, and the thick forest pressing in on both sides of those narrow mountain roads. Emily was trying to read the map while I drove, but somehow we'd gotten turned around on those twisting back roads. Jimmy sat in the back, headphones on, ignoring us like usual. That's when the fog started rolling in. Not your normal evening mist, but something thicker, almost alive. The kind that makes you feel like you're the only people left in the world. Our RV's headlights barely cut through it, and that's when we met her, old Martha Blackwood, standing at a crossroads like she'd been waiting for us all along. Little did I know that meeting would change our lives forever, and the next 7 days would test everything I thought I knew about family, love, and the ancient secrets hidden in those mountains. I'll never forget how Martha looked that night. She was a small, thin woman with long gray hair, wearing a faded blue dress. At first, I thought we should just drive past her. It's not safe to stop for strangers, especially at night. But Emily insisted we couldn't leave an old lady out there in the fog. When I rolled down my window, Martha didn't ask for help like I expected. Instead, she looked straight at Jimmy in the back seat and said, "You shouldn't have brought him here. Not during the harvest moon. They can smell his blood." Emily and I exchanged worried looks. I tried to laugh it off, but Martha's eyes were dead serious. She reached into her pocket and pulled out 3 small leather pouches on strings. "Wear these," she said, handing them through the window. "Don't take them off, especially at night. You're on their territory now." "Whose territory?" Jimmy asked, suddenly interested. It was the first time he'd spoken in hours. Martha's voice got real quiet. "The Dogmen. They run these mountains, have for centuries, and they're always hunting for new blood." I wanted to dismiss it as crazy talk from an old mountain woman, but something in her voice made my skin crawl. Even the fog seemed to get thicker around us. "Take the first right," Martha said, pointing down a dark road. "There's an old camping spot by Crooked Creek. Stay in your RV at night, no matter what you hear. And whatever you do, don't let that boy out alone." Before we could ask anything else, she disappeared into the fog like she'd never been there. Only the leather pouches in our hands proved we hadn't imagined her. Jimmy sniffed his pouch and made a face. "Smells like weird herbs or something." "Put it on," Emily said firmly, already hanging hers around her neck. For once, Jimmy didn't argue. As we drove toward Crooked Creek, I kept checking the rearview mirror. The fog followed us, and somewhere in the distance, I heard what sounded like a wolf's howl. But there hadn't been wolves in these mountains for decades, had there? We found the camping spot just like Martha said. It was a small clearing near Crooked Creek, surrounded by tall oak trees. I parked our RV and tried to act normal, making dinner while Emily set up our beds. But something felt off. The woods were too quiet. No crickets, no owls, nothing. That first night, none of us slept well. Around midnight, Jimmy started tossing and turning in his bunk, mumbling in his sleep. Then we heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. It started as a low growl, somewhere in the darkness beyond our RV's windows. "Tom," Emily whispered, grabbing my arm. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, trying to stay calm. "Probably just a stray dog," I said, but I didn't believe it myself. Then we saw them, 2 red eyes glowing in the darkness, about 7 feet off the ground. Way too high for any normal animal. They stayed there, watching our RV, for what felt like hours. I kept my hand on the RV's keys, ready to start the engine and drive away if I had to. Jimmy woke up suddenly, sitting straight up in his bunk. "They're calling me," he said in a strange voice I'd never heard before. His eyes looked different, almost glowing themselves in the dim light. "Nobody's calling you, son," I said firmly. "Go back to sleep." But Jimmy kept staring out the window, like he was in some kind of trance. The leather pouch around his neck was glowing faintly, and he was sweating despite the cool night air. When morning finally came, I went outside to check around the RV. There in the mud, I found huge footprints, bigger than any humans, shaped like a wolf's paw but walking on 2 legs. They circled our RV all night long. Emily wanted to leave right away, but when I tried to start the RV, it wouldn't turn over. We were stuck there, and somehow I knew those red eyes would be back when darkness fell again. Jimmy spent the whole day staring into the woods, touching the leather pouch around his neck. "They're waiting," he kept saying. "They know I'm here." I didn't want to admit it, but Martha's warning about them hunting for new blood kept echoing in my head. What did they want with my son? The second night was worse. Jimmy's behavior started changing in ways that scared us. He wouldn't eat dinner, and his eyes kept darting to the windows. His skin felt hot, like he had a fever, but he refused to take any medicine. Around sunset, the mist rolled in again, thicker than before. That's when Jimmy started acting really strange. He began sniffing the air, just like a dog would. "Can't you smell them?" he asked us. "They're getting closer." Emily tried to hold him, but he pulled away. "Don't touch me," he snapped, his voice deeper than usual. When he turned to look at us, I swear his eyes had a reddish glow, just for a second. Then the howling started, not just from one direction, but from all around us. It wasn't like normal wolf howls. These sounds were deeper, almost human-like. Jimmy started answering them, making weird noises in his throat. "Make him stop," Emily whispered, clutching my arm. "Tom, make him stop." I tried to reach for Jimmy, but he backed away into the corner of the RV. That's when we saw them, not just two red eyes this time, but dozens of pairs surrounding our RV in a circle. They were moving closer, and in the moonlight, I could make out huge, dark shapes walking on two legs. Jimmy pressed his face against the window, breathing heavily. The leather pouch around his neck was glowing brighter now, and his whole body was shaking. "They're calling me, Dad," he said, his voice trembling. "They say I'm one of them. They say it's in my blood." Suddenly, something huge slammed against the side of our RV, making it rock. Emily screamed. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept near the driver's seat, but deep down I knew it wouldn't do much good against whatever was out there. Through the windows I could see them circling closer, massive shapes, half human, half wolf, some of them 8 feet tall. Their red eyes never blinked, and their shadows seemed to dance in the moonlight. That's when we heard Martha's voice outside, chanting something in a language I didn't understand. The leather pouches around our necks started growing warm, and the creatures outside backed away, howling in frustration. But Jimmy just smiled, and his teeth looked sharper than they should have been. Martha appeared at our RV door early the next morning. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept all night. As soon as we let her in, she went straight to Jimmy, who was curled up in his bunk, shivering despite the warm morning. "I should have known," she said, touching Jimmy's forehead. "The marks are all there. The fever, the changes, the way they call to him. Your boy has the old blood in him." "What do you mean, old blood?" Emily asked, her voice shaking. Martha sighed and sat down at our small RV table. "Your family history, Mrs. Walker? Did you ever know your great-grandfather?" Emily shook her head. "He disappeared in these mountains when my grandmother was just a little girl. Nobody ever knew what happened to him." "He didn't disappear," Martha said quietly. "He joined them, the Dogmen. Some folks have their blood, you see, goes back centuries. And when these people come to the mountains, especially during harvest moon, the pack calls to them, tries to bring them home." Jimmy groaned in his sleep, his body twitching. I noticed his nails looked longer, almost like claws. "Can you help him?" I asked Martha. "There must be something we can do." "There is," she said, "but it's dangerous. The pack won't let him go easily. They've been waiting for someone like him for a long time." She pulled out some old herbs and started mixing them in a cup with hot water. "This will slow the change, but it won't stop it. Tonight will be the worst. It's the peak of the harvest moon. They'll come for him stronger than before." As if on cue, Jimmy sat up suddenly, his eyes wild. "They're angry," he said in that deep, strange voice. "They say you can't keep me from them. They say I belong with the pack." Martha grabbed his hand. "Listen to me, boy. You're still human. Your family loves you. You have a choice." But when Jimmy looked at us, his eyes had that red glow again, and his face. It seemed to be changing, becoming something else, something wild and hungry. "We need to prepare," Martha said urgently. "Tonight, they'll try to take him, and we'll have to be ready for the fight of our lives." I held Emily close as we watched Martha work. Outside, even in broad daylight, we could hear them moving in the woods, waiting, just waiting. As the sun started going down, Martha worked fast. She drew strange symbols on our RV's windows and doors with some kind of white powder. Jimmy was getting worse by the minute. His skin was burning hot, and he kept making these horrible growling sounds. "Listen carefully," Martha said, her voice urgent. "Once night falls, they'll come with everything they've got. The pack wants Jimmy, and they won't stop until they either have him or we break their power over him." She handed each of us a new pouch, bigger than the first ones. "These are stronger. Whatever happens, don't take them off." Suddenly, Jimmy let out a scream that didn't sound human at all. When we turned to look, his face was changing, his nose and mouth pushing forward, his teeth getting longer. Emily started crying, and I felt completely helpless. "Hold him," Martha ordered. "Both of you, hold your son. He needs to feel your love right now. It's the only thing that can keep him human." We grabbed Jimmy, holding him tight even as he thrashed and growled. His skin felt like it was on fire, and I could feel bones moving under his skin in ways they shouldn't. Then we heard them coming. The woods around us exploded with howls, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Through the windows, I could see them emerging from the trees. They were enormous, walking on two legs but covered in fur, with wolf-like heads and glowing red eyes. The biggest one, probably their leader, came right up to our RV and stood there. It had to be at least 9 feet tall. It threw its head back and let out a howl that shook our whole vehicle. Jimmy responded with his own howl, fighting against our grip. "Let me go," he snarled, his voice a mixture of human and animal. "They're my real family. Let me go." Martha started chanting, throwing some kind of herbs into the air. The symbols on our windows began to glow blue, creating a barrier that kept the creatures from touching our RV. But they kept coming, throwing themselves against the barrier. Each hit made the RV rock, and I could see Martha's protective symbols starting to fade. "The choice has to be his," Martha shouted over the noise. "Jimmy, listen to me. You have to choose, your family or the pack. But choose quickly, because we can't hold them back much longer." Jimmy looked at us with eyes that were now more wolf than human, tears running down his changing face. Outside, the pack's howls grew louder, calling him to join them. Inside, we held onto our son, praying we wouldn't lose him to the darkness. Everything happened so fast after that. The pack's leader smashed against our RV one last time, and Martha's glowing symbols finally broke. Windows shattered, and cold air rushed in. Emily screamed as huge, clawed hands reached through the broken windows. Jimmy was almost fully changed now. His face had become wolf-like. Fur was sprouting all over his body, and his hands had turned into claws. But he was crying, tears running down his furry face, caught between two worlds. "I don't want to hurt you," he growled at us, his voice barely human anymore. "But they're so strong. I can feel them in my head." Martha stepped forward, her gray hair flying wild around her face. "There's only one way to end this," she said. "But it'll cost us." She pulled out an old knife with strange markings on it. "The pack's power can be broken, but it needs a sacrifice, a willing one." Before any of us could stop her, Martha cut her own palm and pressed it against Jimmy's forehead. She started speaking words that seemed to make the air itself shake. The pack outside went crazy, howling and clawing at our RV. "I give my life force to break the curse," Martha shouted. "By my blood and my power, I set this boy free." A bright light filled the RV, so bright it hurt to look at. Martha's body began to glow, and I could see her getting older by the second, like her life was draining away. But Jimmy was changing back. The fur disappeared, his face became human again, and his eyes returned to their normal color. The pack's leader let out a howl of rage and tried to grab Jimmy, but something stopped it, a barrier of light surrounding our son. Martha collapsed to the floor, looking 100 years old now. "Run," she whispered. "Take him and run. They can't touch him now. The curse is broken." I jumped into the driver's seat and turned the key. This time, the engine roared to life. Emily held Jimmy in the back as I floored it, crashing through the circle of dogmen. In the rearview mirror, I saw Martha's body disappear in a flash of light, and the pack, retreating into the woods, their howls now filled with sorrow rather than rage. We drove all night, not stopping until we were far away from those mountains. Jimmy slept the whole time, completely human again, but the leather pouch around his neck still glowed faintly. It's been over 50 years since that terrible night in the Ozarks, but none of us ever forgot what happened. Jimmy recovered slowly. He had nightmares for months, and sometimes on full moon nights, he'd get restless, and his eyes would have a strange glow. But he never fully changed again. We kept the leather pouches Martha gave us. They're worn and faded now, but sometimes, especially during harvest moons, they still give off a faint, warm glow. Jimmy wears his to this day. The strangest thing happened about a year after our escape. We were driving past those mountains on our way to visit relatives, keeping well away from the forest. As we passed a crossroads, we saw an old woman in a blue dress, looking exactly like Martha. She smiled and waved at us, then vanished like mist in the morning sun. Jimmy's different now. Calmer. More at peace with himself. The anger issues that troubled him as a teenager disappeared after that night. He says sometimes he can still hear the pack calling, very faintly, like a distant echo, but it doesn't pull at him anymore. We never told anyone the full story until now. Who would believe us? But every now and then, we hear news reports about strange sightings in the Ozarks. Huge wolf-like creatures walking on two legs, red eyes in the darkness, and an old woman who appears to warn travelers away from certain roads during full moons. Emily and I are in our 80s now, and Jimmy's a grandfather himself, but we still keep our RV, the same one from that night. The claw marks are still visible on its sides, and no amount of paint will cover them up. Sometimes, when I look at those marks, I remember Martha's sacrifice and how close we came to losing our son to something ancient and powerful. To this day, if you drive through the Ozark Mountains during a harvest moon, you might hear howling in the distance. If you do, keep driving. And if you see an old woman at a crossroads trying to give you a leather pouch, take it. She might just save your life, like she saved ours.